Welcome to EPG Pathshala. My name is Devisha. I am a faculty at Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. Today we are going to cover the module on sustainable development from the paper Environment and Society. Basically, the module introduces the concept of sustainable development, the history of sustainable development and the developments that has happened till now. The key discussions for today's class would be on the introduction to sustainable development, history of the concept, how sustainable development is portrayed, sustainability in different spheres of development, Millennium Development Goals and Sustainable Development Goals. Let's start with the introduction of sustainable development. Now, the concept of sustainable development is a result of growing awareness of the global links between mounting environmental problems, socio-economic issues to do with poverty and inequality, and concerns about a healthy future for humanity. The concept has been widely discussed and has a variety of meanings per se. It is accepted by corporate, governments, social activists and environmental activists, and each has their own interpretation on what sustainable development means. More than 100 of the world's largest companies in mining industries, oil and gas refineries, manufacturers of autos, chemical, cement, electricity generation, drugs and biotechnology services such as banking and finance are all members of the Business World Council for Sustainable Development. That is the first aspect which covers a corporate body. Now, many environmental protection organizations, including multinational organizations like WWF, that is the Worldwide Fund for Nature, Greenpeace, etc., are committed to sustainable development. Although they are very critical about the companies who are members of the WBCSD that we had discussed earlier. Organizations and individuals with concerns about environmental and social issues do support sustainable development but disagree with the outlook of international economic organizations. Let's start with the history of this concept, that is sustainable development. So, to motivate countries to work and pursue sustainable development collectively, UN established the Brundtland Commission in 1983. The Brundtland Commission released a report which is known as the Our Common Future, also known as the Brundtland Report, in October 1987, a document which coined and defined the meaning of the term, that is a sustainable development. Now, the definition that Brundtland Commission gave to sustainable development is that the environment is where we live, and the development is what we all do in attempting to improve our lot within that abode. Now, these two are inseparable is what the definition speaks about. Sustainable development is the kind of development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. Now, let's talk about two main concepts in sustainable development. There are two key concepts. One is the concept of need and the other is the idea of limitations. Now, let's look at the concept of need. The concept of need is in particular the essential needs of the world's poor people is what covers as a concept of need. Now, to which they should also be given overriding priority. The second aspect is the idea of limitations, which is imposed by the state of technology and social organizations on the environment's ability to meet both present and future needs. So, Brundtland's definition and the ideas expressed recognize the dependency of humans on environment to meet needs as well-being, and well-being is in a much wider sense than merely exploiting nature per se or just resources per se. So, ecology and economy are becoming ever more interwoven, that is locally, regionally, globally, nationally, any sphere you say, it is getting interwoven. The report stresses that humanity, whether in an industrialized or a rural subsistence society, depends for security and basic existence on the environment, the economy and our well-being now and in the future will also need the support of environment per se. Now let's come to the topic on portrayal of sustainable development. Now sustainable development is often presented as being divided into the economy, the government and society. Now the three sectors are being presented as three interconnected rings, and the model has a conceptual simplicity basically. So often sustainable development is presented as aiming to bring the three together in a balanced way, reconciling conflicts per se. Here you can see the three rings that I was talking about, which is the environment, society and economy. This is the first one way of presenting the three aspects or the relationship between society, economy and environment. Now the weaknesses and limitations of this model that we have discussed is that the view that there is a separation and even autonomy of the society, economy and environment from each other takes a compartmentalized approach to sustainable development. The separation neglects the connections between the economy, society and environment. It leads to an assumption that building capital can replace or substitute for natural resources and systems, and completely ignores the fact that any amount of afforestation or plantations cannot substitute a forest. Genetic engineering cannot replace biodiversity, and there is no technology that can reconstruct the atmosphere or the ozone layer. So a sectoral approach can divert attention from asking questions that are important to getting to the core of sustainable development, such as those about the nature of our society, what the policy priorities are and how decisions are made and in whose interest. The wider social issues often fall off the sustainable development agenda per se. So environmental economists discuss about the environmental impacts of business such as pollution, biodiversity loss and degradation of habitats. These are all unpaid costs or externalities per se. In such cases, how can the corporate pay for the loss that that they have made, and who should they pay these costs to? It is impossible to imagine money compensating an organism or humans for loss of habitat on which they depend. There are many social costs that business cannot pay for, such as unemployment or a loss of culture or damage to health, or as I was explaining, loss of forest or plantation wherein biodiversity is lost. So to cover all this, another frame that we would talk about is a more realistic presentation of the relationship between society, economy and environment. The economy nested within society, which in turn is nested within the environment per se. So human society depends on environment, although in contrast the environment would continue without society. The economy depends on society and the environment actually exists without the economy. The effect of pretending that the economy and society are each a unified whole is to ignore diversity and difference, and instead gives a precedence to the dominant parts. So here you can see that economy, then comes the society, and within the environment frame both the economy and society is existed. So that as discussed, there is a problematic space with respect to having economy and society within the environment frame. The third model that we can see is the environment and biodiversity as an important part of human sustainability per se. So the changes in science and technology, art and culture are stimulated by environmental diversity. Vandana Shiva, a noted environmentalist, points to how global capitalism exploits all form of diversity for profit. Sadly, it risks destroying that very diversity with dangerous consequence for people and the environment. So here the presentation of relationship between society, economy and environment is thus. Within the environment, we have the human activity and well-being, which is stored within the environment realm. So, what we explained earlier, the needs in particular with the world's poor is something that is not seen in the current scenario. So, sustainable development basically strives to provide the priority, the overriding priority to the needs of the poor per se. The next aspect is the idea of limitations, which is imposed by the state of technology and social organizations on the environment's ability to meet both present and future needs. This is something that we explained just previously. What I would want to explain here is that the future needs and the present needs also includes the environment that we are part of. So, whatever we consume this at present may not be present in the future if we overconsume it. So, again the sustainability aspect of development is reiterated in this aspect of key concepts that we have already discussed. We have discussed about the relationship between the economy, environment and society. Now, let us move on to the next topic, which is the principles of sustainable development. Hutton in 1999 outlines 5 equity principles. So, I am going to explain each of these 5 equity principles. The first one is futurity. This is basically the intergenerational equity. The next one he talks about is the social justice. That basically is nothing but intra-generational equity. The third principle that we would be discussing is the transfrontier responsibility, which basically is the geographical equity. The next one is the procedural equity, where which is basically people treated openly and fairly. And the final principle is the interspecies equity, because basically it is the importance of biodiversity. So, these principles can be summarized as futurity, to give regard for the future of needs of future generations; equity, covering social justice regardless of class, gender, race, etc., or where they live, and participation, so that people are able to shape their own futures. Now, we will move on to different spheres of development that sustainable development per se, which is the first one we will be discussing is on the agriculture. Now, sustainable agriculture consists of environment friendly methods of farming, for example organic farming, that allow the production of good and food and rearing of livestock without damage to human or natural habitats. Now, it prevents damaging effects of fertilizers, pesticides and weedicides onto soil, water, biodiversity, as well as on human working or living on the farm or in neighboring areas. Now, the concept of sustainable agriculture includes transfer of improved natural resources, biotic and economic base, rather than one which has been depleted or polluted. New ideas of sustainable agriculture include permaculture, agroforestry, mixed farming, multiple cropping and crop rotation. Many methods of certification, sustainability standards exist, which includes organic certification, fair wild certification, etc. These certifications help a consumer to choose products which have been manufactured following the principles of sustainable development. So, one very good example of sustainable agriculture is the Pokali farming in Kerala. It is seen in the wetland ecosystem, the coastal ecosystem, wetland ecosystem in Kerala, where they have cyclical fish prawn cultivation per se. So, here they do not use any fertilizers or pesticides. They go by 6 months for agriculture and 6 months for fish prawn cultivation. This is a very natural form of agriculture and fish prawn cultivation that was carried out for many years in Kerala. So sustainable agriculture is also another example would be farmers, the subsistence farmers in Wayanad or any other tribal belt who do not use any other external factors for productivity per se. These are subsistence form of agriculture, but productivity can also be enhanced by, say, crop rotation, crop pattern, changing crop patterns along, considering the monsoons or considering the rainfall, considering the sunlight that they receive, etc. So these are already followed and it has to be promoted per se. The next area that we are going to cover is energy. Sustainable energy is clean and can be given over a long period of time. Unlike fossil fuels that most countries are using, renewable energy also produces little or no, even no pollution. In India, renewable energy, hydroelectric, solar and wind energy are being promoted. Solar energy has recently become available very easily. For example, TIS has solar energy which basically gives electricity to most of the hostels that we have. Another example would be the solar panels that are installed in the Cochin airport, the Cochin International Airport. Now, mining for non-renewable resources, sources of energy, fossil fuels, have a direct impact on environment, and as far as environment is concerned, people are a part of it and it impacts us as well. Several communities in Orissa, Chhattisgarh and Northeast India has protested against mining in their regions. Toxicants from coal, nuclear power plants, refineries has threatened health of local communities. So as renewable energy becomes more common, it will provide better social equity to communities. The next area that we are going to cover is the technology. A core concept in sustainable development is that innovative technology can assist humans to meet their developmental needs, and such technology is often referred to as an appropriate technology. This has been an ideological movement originally articulated as intermediate technology by the economist E.F. Schumacher. In his influential work, Small is Beautiful, and today covers a wide range of technologies. Both Schumacher and many modern day proponents of appropriate technology also emphasize the technology as human-centered. So, one example of technology that is used as sustainable technology is solar panels that are used, solar parks that are promoted by Government of India, and also windmills. For example, Tamil Nadu in Coimbatore especially, they have a lot of windmills that promote sustainable energy, wherein we do not have to use non-renewable resources like coal and hydroelectricity power, and we focus on renewable resources like sunlight and wind. Now, we will be covering the aspect which is business. The most broadly accepted criterion for corporate sustainability constitutes a firm's efficient use of natural capital. This eco-efficiency is usually calculated as the economic value added by a firm in relation to its aggregated ecological impact. This idea has been promoted by World Business Council for Sustainable Development, as they are part of that organization. The mainstream environmental groups such as Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace, WWF are largely in the reform group, and increasingly has moved towards grassroots activism, and mass protests has been made and even to political lobbying and working with business and government per se. We have covered so far the different spheres of sustainable development, which includes agriculture, energy, technology, etc. Now we will be covering the Millennium Development Goals. In 2000, after a decade of United Nations conferences and summits, world leaders came together at the United Nations headquarters in New York and adopted the United Nations Millennium Declaration. So the declaration committed nations to have a new global partnership to reduce extreme poverty and set out a series of 8 time-bound targets, with a deadline of 2015. That has become known as the Millennium Development Goals. Now, what are the Millennium Development Goals? We'll go one by one. The first Millennium Development Goal is to eradicate extreme poverty and hunger. The second one is to achieve universal primary education, followed by to promote gender equality and empower women. This is followed by the next Millennium Development Goal, which is to reduce child mortality, followed by improve maternal health, combat HIV, AIDS, malaria and other diseases, ensure environmental sustainability, and to develop a global partnership for development. So, Millennium Development Goals were indicators that establish measurable, universal agreed objectives for preventing deadly diseases, dealing with extreme poverty and hunger, and expanding primary education to all children as development priorities. The legacy and achievements of the Millennium Development Goals per se provide us with valuable lessons and experiences to begin work on the new goals. So, the Sustainable Development Goals are an urgent call to shift the world onto a more sustainable path. Now, we would be basically covering on the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals were formulated at the UN Conference on Sustainable Development in Rio in 2017. In September 2015, the United Nations General Assembly formally adopted the Universal Integrated and Transformative 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and it is a set of 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The objective was to produce a set of universal goals that meet the urgent environmental, political and economic challenges faced by our world today. The goals are to be implemented and achieved in every country from the year 2016 to 2030. These 17 goals build on the achievements of the Millennium Development Goals and replace them includes new areas such as climate change, economic inequality, innovation, sustainable consumption, peace and justice among other priorities. The goals are interconnected. The success of one goal depends on the other. The Sustainable Development Goals coincided with another historic agreement reached in 2015 at the COP21 Paris Climate Conference. The Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, the Climate Resolutions and the Sustainable Development Goals provide a set of common standards and achievable targets to reduce carbon emissions, achievable targets to manage the risk of climate change and also natural disasters, and to have a better comeback after a crisis. Now, Sustainable Development Goals are cover issues that affect all humans and even environment, and is a very important aspect that one needs to look into. The discussion so far, we have completed what sustainable development is. We have also looked into various spheres of sustainable development, the key concept behind sustainable development, the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, for further enhanced reading, I would suggest you to look into e-text and the e-Pathshala section for resources in that. And I hope that you have enjoyed today's class. Thank you.